Welcome to today's panel on offshoring. We have experts Meryl and Matthew joining us. So they've got lots of insights to share, lots of stories of things they've gone through before all of us. So I'm Ellen. I look after partner marketing at A2X, and which basically means I get to collaborate with all of our amazing accountant and bookkeeping partners to help other accountants and bookkeepers scale their practice, reach their goals. And yeah, so we'll hear a bit more from Meryl and Matthew later on, but they've both successfully scaled their e-commerce accounting practice. I know Acuity also focuses on a few other niches. So yeah, they've got lots to share with us today. Just quickly going over the agenda. So we're going to speak about the journey into offshoring, Matthew and Meryl's motivations into looking into this. I'm sure we've all seen the numbers, this big 300,000 CPAs have left the profession. Like, where do you look? We're going to cover salaries, the recruitment process, managing security, how you go about training, onboarding, and then, of course, ongoing management. So we will have time for Q&A at the end, but if you would like to, please ask throughout. This is going to be super conversational. So yes. And before we jump into the questions, I thought it'd be kind of helpful to kind of differentiate between outsourcing and offshoring. I think a lot of the time accountants do dive into offshoring with an outsourcing mindset. And so, Meryl, I'll pass this over to you to kind of explain how you view these two.
Yeah, so I think of outsourcing and offshoring as slightly different things. So outsourcing is where you're paying for a result. And so we did that in the very early days of Binges. We were experimenting, working with some contractors in India. And the way that arrangement worked was we paid a fixed price per job. And then they delivered a set of accounts back to us. But we ran into some difficulties in that I wanted to build team culture, the Binges team culture, but we didn't really have control over the team members because they were the outsourcing company's team members rather than ours, and we were paying for a result rather than hiring a team member. And I think of offshoring in that you're hiring someone to join your team, and that could be through an offshoring provider or going direct, and we can get into all of that. But you have a bit more control over training that person, who they are, whereas with outsourcing, you're paying for that result, and they might swap people in and out. And it's more about making sure that they deliver that set of outcomes or that result to you. And I will add that both of them are good options. It just depends what you're trying to achieve at your firm.
Yeah, for sure. I think, and yeah, before again we jump into the questions, it'd be great to kind of go over the types of offshoring models. I think when people think of offshoring, they automatically go to a BPO, and I believe that's where you both started. So yeah, we'll briefly touch on these models and then we'll get into the good stuff.
Yeah, so I think of a BPO or an offshoring company, they typically provide everything. So they're handling recruiting the team member. They're also handling HR, payroll, IT. They often will have an office. And so often that's the only option that people consider. There are other options out there. So some firms are managing the whole thing themselves. So they're going on to something like Work, they're recruiting a team member and they're managing all of it themselves. I call that DIY. There's businesses like TeamUp, which I'm involved with, which handles just the recruitment part of that process. And again, the firm would handle that themselves. And then I believe Matthew has gone the route of setting up an entity in the Philippines. And I've got a ton of questions for Matthew about that, and we'll dive into that later as well. And that's another option. And I know of other firms doing that too, where they've set up an entity in the Philippines and are managing that process themselves. And something I will add, there's something else called an employer of record service. And so that's part of the service that a BPO is providing, where there's a contract. So there's an entity in the Philippines, and that entity has the employment contract with the Filipino team member. And then the accounting firm has a contract with the BPO or the employer of record provider. And that's how payroll is done. But you can also go directly there's also businesses that provide just that employment of record service. And so that's an option to consider if you want to unbundle that from the typical BPO or offshoring provider. And again, that's not something that's well known in the industry, that you can just buy that piece of the service.
Cool. Amazing. All right. Well, let's use this as an opportunity to get to know you both a bit better. Matthew, behave yourself. um,
I'll be
um,
good. I'll be good. I'll be nice.
yeah, so I would love to know kind of your journey into offshoring, kind of what motivated you to start looking at this model, and how has your approach evolved over time? Matthew, would you like to kick it off?
Sure. Our journey kind of started where we started seeing in our SaaS vertical, actually, and with some businesses where we knew the CEOs that people were engaging virtual assistants really successfully in the Philippines to free up their like their top level staff. So if you think of like your management team, your board, anybody like that, we had one of our uh, folks here in Atlanta meet with our whole senior leadership team, and we identified all the repeatable tasks that were going on, and we identified that, oh, we needed two virtual assistants to support the team, and that freed up their capacity. So in true Acuity fashion, we didn't go through a partner to start. We DIY'd it and did some direct contracts directly with those folks, those two folks in the Philippines who are actually still with us today. And they have moved subsequently to support primarily like one person. So they kind of primarily now support one person instead of a group. One of them is actually like our chief of staff in the Philippines that like kind of does a ton. But the other one kind of is more of like a true virtual assistant in that respect. Um, because that was so successful initially with those two folks, we were having a lot of hard time in our sales team, in a role, our appointment setting role. So we have a role in our sales team to set appointments for the people that close the deals, and we were seeing the deal flow slow down, and it was much harder at the price point that our average customers were coming in at to hire in the US. So we're like, why not try that in the Philippines? So at that point, we reached out to a partner. We used TOA, who's a partner in the Philippines with us still today. And we hired some salespeople through them, and subsequently two accountants through them, to work on our accounting team, and then two tax people to work on our tax team. Fast forward to today, we did also another merger with another company that works with a company called Nimble. So one of the things about the partner firms, or the BPOs, or whatever you want to talk about, there's kind of two categories to me. There's like the big guys, and then there's like the accountant run ones. So you got like Dave Olson from Nimble, like who's runs a firm in the United States, started Nimble. You got like Kristen Keats, who started Cadencia, which is in more kind of near shore, kind of in South America, kind of Mexico. They're in Mexico, sorry. So those categories, and then we have the big BPOs in India and in Philippines. But we started doing that, and then we added somebody in Greece, and now we have somebody 50% of the time in Argentina because of love. He spends 6 months there, and 6 months here in the US. But like we have a really interesting, quirky team with two partners, some people direct, and then currently we're finalizing the process where we have a legal entity. We're in the stage we're getting a bank account in the Philippines, and then we're having to go through the negotiations with everybody to properly extricate them from those relationships and into the legal entity we call Acuity PH. So I don't know, that was a long way around, but it was a complex journey. So
Yeah, sounds like it.
so there's a
Meryl,
lot to unpack there, so we can go wherever you want.
yeah. Meryl, do you have anything to add to that? Did yours kind of differ slightly, or any
I hope
questions?
it differed. I think that was a pretty messy journey.
Well, there's some similarities for us too, and some differences. So we got started in India first, and I actually traveled to India and met team members there. But that was in the first year of being into. So we didn't have good enough processes at the time to really be effectively working with an offshore team. So we cancelled that and then only hired locally for a number of years. And our challenge was that our hiring strategy was to hire part-time mums. That was mainly the type of accountants that we were hiring. But we were running into challenges around how many staff we needed to hire if they could only work 12, 15 hours a week. We wanted to have some people that could work 40 hours a week. And so a couple of years later, we had heard of the Philippines. I'd been in a business coaching group, and everyone said, oh, you need a VA, which is similar to what Matthew was talking about. So I hired a VA for a little while, but I don't think I did a great job at that hiring process. And I spent more time managing her and trying to find work for her to do than actually getting much benefit. So it was a little bit later that I heard, oh, you can actually hire talented accounting professionals, not data entry VAs, but actually talented, ambitious accountants. And so we had another go, and we DIY'd this again. We used Upwork and recruited somebody, and I think we got lucky and found an amazing team member, and that really helped us. On the Australian part of the business, we'd also been going through a BPO, so we went through one of the big accounting providers, and that went pretty well until COVID, when everything switched to work from home, and then our team members didn't want to go back into the office, and so we ran into some difficulties there. Moved to a different provider, and then eventually decided to manage it ourselves. So we've kind of had lots of twists and turns from India to the Philippines, the BPOs, running it ourselves, made lots and lots of mistakes along the way. It feels like we've settled into a good routine now, and part of that was finding a manager in the Philippines. So I think similar to Matthew's chief of staff role, we've got a really strong leader in the Philippines on the ground, managing the rest of our team leaders and accountants over there. And that was really key for us in finding that person to really help build culture over there, but also understanding the Beanages culture and trying to build firm culture for one business rather than having an onshore and offshore team. So we've got a bit over 20 team members in the Philippines now.
Yeah, wow. Do you feel like you're happy with where you're at now, or do you feel like you've got further room to improve, or because you've obviously kind of moved towards this direct approach?
I mean, there's always room to improve. So I think we're always learning. We traveled to the Philippines for the first time last year for a team retreat, took everyone on a big holiday to Boracay. And so again, there we were learning as we were spending time together in person, learning more about who our team members were, what they want, where we can improve. So I think we always try to ask questions and keep trying to improve, but it feels like we're in a better place now than we were 3 or 4 years ago, when we were still making mistakes and having situations like having a team member quit when we thought everything was fine. And clearly we hadn't been asking the right questions to flag that. So we don't have situations like that anymore, but I still think there's areas where we can do a better job.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, back to you, Matthew, because you mentioned you're kind of moving towards this entity model. Do you have any advice? I know some people on this webinar are looking to perhaps exit their BPO and try a different approach. Do you have any advice around that? And Meryl as well. I'm sure there's things to consider.
Oh, there's lots of stuff to consider. So I guess to give people a snapshot where we're trying to go is we also, so we have about 45 people internationally. So we have the one person in Greece, the one person halftime in Argentina. We have 13 people through a partner in St. Lucia, which is in the same time zone as most of our clients. And that's Grow Resources. And then we have the 27 people in the Philippines that we're consolidating into the Philippines entity. So for us, the decision by jurisdiction is there's a certain critical mass that we felt like once you achieve that from a numbers perspective, the entity model makes sense. I put that somewhere between 20 and 30 people. Other people have told me that should be closer to 80. But I mean, maybe we'll be 80 people there. So, I mean, let's go. So we embarked on that journey. There's lots of decision points, particularly in any jurisdiction. I'm sure every jurisdiction is very different. But one of the things you need to think about is the process changes based on if you're going to have ownership of somebody in that country. That seems pretty consistent across all the jurisdictions. So are you able to identify somebody to have 5, 10, 25% of the entity that you're going to have in that jurisdiction? We actually found a path in the Philippines to have it directly owned by the US company. And we have subsequently come to find out that added 18 months to our journey, probably, of like getting set up, because we're about 2 years in to the setup process now, and it's incredibly red tape-ish, I'll say. So there's lots of red tape in the Philippines, unfortunately, to date, or we just don't know how to navigate it. But it's been a journey.
Can I jump in with a question? I'm really curious about this. So we don't have an entity in the Philippines, but it's an interesting thing to explore. So knowing what you know now, would you still go through this process again, knowing all of the roadblocks and red tape?
I think so, because you touched on something earlier that we found, like no matter if you have good partners or bad partners in the Philippines or any jurisdiction, you have multiple cultures. So like our number one priority was like when we hit that critical mass, we want to have a single kind of global culture. And it's very difficult to do that when you're have a kind of a patchwork piecemeal strategy with direct, TOA, nimble, even though all those people have been great, like for the most part, with almost every interaction, right? I mean, there's always bumps to everybody, right? But like everybody I would recommend, right? So still recommend to work with. So I think there's just this consistency we're longing for, but it goes through all these things we're going to talk about, like security and different things. Like at some point, like having like what you might call a Frankenstein back office, you kind of want to get consistent. Just say, how about you say everybody in the entire globe follows our IT security protocols because we're all work from home. So like, let's just have one protocol. And we're going to be able to do that because of the partnership we have with the St. Lucia entity will allow us to do that as well. So other people are more rigid with their IT protocols in their jurisdictions.
Cool. Yeah, I'd say that's very, very similar for us, that we wanted to build one team culture. And so we had a bit of that Frankenstein model as well, with multiple BPO partners we were working with, some direct. And then we found that the BPOs also had some of their own culture. So they're running team days, which are great. We want that for our team. But then some other team members aren't going along to that. And so that was really important for us too. And that was an important factor, that we wanted one culture, one way of doing things.
Like in a silly example is like when our folks were in office, like having to have discussions to get them allowed to wear Acuity t-shirts in their offices.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Right.
so when they're on calls or just to have a little identity, like we had sent them their swag and they wanted to wear their t-shirts. So like that was a conversation when you have a partner, which
Mm-hmm.
I didn't expect to want to have. And that's a very, very interesting conversation. And I understand and respect all the sides of it now.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, we'll move on to our next topic, which is around salaries, because I think this is something everyone's super interested in when it does come to offshoring. And I also thought it'd be quite a good opportunity to kind of touch on the ethics around hiring in the Philippines. And if you have any kind of stories or insights to share there, because I know those questions have come up. So maybe let's just kind of start with the ethics around offshoring, and then we can get into the actual kind of what can you pay.
Matthew, do you want to go first?
But what do you mean by the ethics? Like, does it make you feel bad to pay people in one jurisdiction less than the others? Because
Yes,
some
yes,
US companies do that by
yeah,
state in the United
yeah,
States.
totally. It's just a
Oh,
question that has definitely come up from the community. So
yeah.
yeah,
There's definitely a, I remember worrying about it. I remember worrying about it less when I met the human beings I was talking to in person. I don't know that that helps anybody at all, but like from a, like the reality is like you probably wouldn't move these jobs if it wasn't for less pay because of the added learnings and the complexities with moving to different jurisdictions, right? So you're taking a business risk. If you want to rationalize this and be logical, you're taking a business risk, like entering into a new jurisdiction, new compliance, new rules, like all the IT securities, talking to customers about why this is okay, education, all that kind of stuff. You're taking a business risk from there. So it's not the same thing, first of all. Like it's not like the same thing because I have to have a conversation about it. I have to have different policies. I have to have a webinar to say, is it okay to outsource, right? So like it's different. So let's agree that it's different. Like if you want to go through the philosophical exercise of like, do you pay people more than go to talk to the people in San Francisco and ask them why they need so much more. It's all a cost of living conversation. I don't understand the macroeconomics behind that. But in reality, like, it's a key factor for us staying competitive. And that was one of the reasons we did it. So I guess I'll be unapologetic about it.
Awesome. Great answer. Thanks, Matthew. Meryl, do you have anything to add to that, or any stories?
Yeah, I think Matthew's described that really well. And I think there's two parts to that. So are you taking jobs from your local country? And I think often you would, if you had to pay the local salaries, you just might not hire that role. And often you're hiring for slightly different roles. So I feel like we're helping to grow a bigger business. And also we're hiring in Australia and in the US. And then I think there's also, are you taking advantage of team members in the Philippines with this lower pay? And going out and meeting our team and hearing their stories, I'd say absolutely not. We're giving them a fantastic opportunity at life. So I heard stories of a young guy, mid-20s, who was now paying to put his brothers and sisters through college. He'd retired his dad. His dad had a physical laboring job, and he was able to stop that and cook meals for the family. So he was happy. There was another woman about to turn 30 who was now learning how to swim and learning how to drive, because previously with her commute, she didn't have the time to build life skills like that. Some of our team members are going on their first overseas holidays. So hearing those stories just was incredible. Hearing about the life opportunities that we're creating for team members over there.
Yeah, we had a similar experience to that, and I'll just echo that. On like 13 of our 27 people, I think it was the first flight they had taken in their lives. And they're also had the same theme of multi-generations living in the same household, and them being able to support both parents and children and siblings through all kinds of endeavors. Those are common, like, recurring themes. I'll add to that like, we're adding a skill to both our US and in all our international teammates with the fact that we're like, in the future, I'm convinced that this will be common to work across these country lines, and there's some discomfort to it. So everybody that works with us breaks down that discomfort, because the way I've seen it broken down is through human interactions. And so we have mixed pods of people in different cultures in different countries who are like, oh, they just have a kid. Like, as soon as you see a picture of somebody's kid, you're like, oh, now they're a parent, I'm a parent. Like, they're not, like, all the stuff starts breaking down with the humanity of it. So that was an important takeaway for me.
I love that.
I really like how, Matthew, you described that. And so we're talking about offshoring and outsourcing. We actually kind of think of it as a global team, which I think similar to Matthew, because we've got people in 6 countries. So yes, we've got a lot of people in the Philippines, but we've also got someone in Serbia, we've got someone in Spain, someone in the UK. So we're kind of all spread out as well. So it's not, it's not just an offshoring location. It's a global team, and people are working with people from all different countries.
Yeah.
Cool. Hey, well, let's get to kind of what salaries can you kind of expect to pay.
Oh, because we're accountants and you want to get to the numbers? Okay.
Exactly. I know you have mentioned, it depends on kind of the different roles, and we've spoken, Meryl, and you've said, actually salaries are actually really important, right? And really important to mention. I know there's some nuances in the Philippines. If you can talk about that, and then we'll talk numbers.
Yeah, so on the next slide, we'll get into some pay rates that you'd expect to pay for different levels in the Philippines. And I will add that it's a moving market. So as there's more demand and the rates are going up each year as to what you'd expect to pay. But a couple of things to be aware of. Salaries are important to everybody, but I would say particularly important in the Philippines. That's how they're being able to do these things, like put their brothers and sisters through college. So that is critical. 13th month is expected. So that's an extra month of pay in December. And so that's often expected. And if you're hiring as employees, then things like healthcare benefits would be part of that package. So we don't have a great annual bonus system yet, but we have paid bonuses. That's probably an area that we can improve, but also again, because salaries are so important, that's something that can be helpful. And I wanted to reiterate, it's on the slide, but you're not just hiring virtual assistants, you're hiring ambitious professionals who are trying to grow, they want to learn, and they want to move up, whether that's into a management role or a technical stream. So Ellen's got it on the slide here. These are from the research that I've done, these are the current monthly salaries in US dollars.
And I just
mean,
kind of,
that'll,
yeah, and I think most countries kind of have a rule of thumb that you kind of think of with salaries. If you're US, well, if you're any base, you can kind of do the faction wherever. So like for us, St. Lucia was 50%. For Philippines, it's 1/3 of US rates. Like different jurisdictions, like India has a different rate. Like you have different jurisdictions that you'll kind of understand or get to understand. You probably, even in HR, you'll put like, this is kind of our baseline, and we'll check the markets as well, but those tend to hold pretty close. So
yeah, cool.
I'll tell a quick story about that. We've got different pay grades so that a manager's not getting paid less than a team member that they're supervising. But with pay rates going up recently, we had to restructure that because to hire new staff, a junior team member was coming in at a higher rate than some of the senior staff. So we had to reshuffle all of our pay scales to make sure that they fitted in with each other. We found that Filipino team members like to talk with each other about what they're getting paid. And so it's important that it's consistent and there's a clear framework we found for deciding what different levels are going to get paid.
Amazing.
And then if you don't go direct, you just assume somewhere between $500 and $1,000 a month for an additional cost for the partner fees. So
right, so that's through the BPO.
Yeah, depending on your volume. Like if you have 1 or 2 people, it's going to be closer to $1,000. If you get up there and you're in the 20s or 30s people, you're probably getting closer to the deal like prices. If you've seen deal, that's one of those things. So.
Okay, cool. Awesome. All righty. Well, yeah, I wanted to touch on salary first before we go into recruitment, because I know, Meryl, you've mentioned just how important it is to mention salaries in the recruitment process. And is this maybe more the case if you are going direct, because you're probably obviously more involved with that side of things. So it'd be really interesting if you could walk us through kind of what the recruitment process looks like when it comes to offshoring. And I've got this diagram up again because I'm sure it differs between models. And I know between you all, you've walked through all of these steps, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you're going through someone that's handling recruitment, so that would be a BPO would be handling that for you. Or if you're working with something like TeamUp, which only handles the recruitment process, then they would be helping to craft that job description, which I like to think of as a sales letter. So you're trying to compete for talent. You want people that have lots of options. So how can you stand out? And that's something that both the BPO or recruiter would be helping you with. So what's your value proposition as a firm and why would they want to work with you? And then try to get lots of people to apply. So with the recruiters, they've got access to LinkedIn and other recruitment tools where they'll ask a whole lot of applicants to apply, maybe 100 or 200 initial applicants to vet for then the initial interview stage. And then as the accounting firm, you'll often get presented with 3 or 5 options of candidates that have been vetted, they've been interviewed, and then you can select from that or decide that none of them are suitable and give feedback if they're going in a different direction. If you're doing the DIY model, which I have also done, then you're doing that yourself. And that's fine as well. I have found some good people like that. It was just quite time consuming. So that was me on Upwork vetting people and asking people to apply and then doing probably 10 interviews to then narrow that down to find the right person. And then, I mean, Matthew could probably talk to how they're doing recruitment now with their own entity.
Yeah, I think we had several kind of aha moments, and we were lucky to start off this way. But so because we started off with virtual assistants, which have a similar kind of profile to like accountants where they need to be very detail oriented, we had a 3-step process of going through from the application process. So it had different gates. So because they had to be detail oriented, unless they completed all 3 gates, they didn't go through. Like we didn't even look at the 100 resumes that did two of the three things. Like if they couldn't do that, that was just a gate. That was just a, so having a good kind of funnel process is critically important to kind of identifying the right people. If you do that process well, you're talking to a large, a fewer number of people, but they're higher quality candidates for the roles that you have. This is particularly in response to like a detail role. But if you think of like tax returns, bookkeeping, like any VA stuff, like those are all heavy compliance, detail-oriented role. The other thing we learned in that process, especially we learned this when we went through the partners, is the partners had a language assessment. So that was interesting. So you get a score, like, you know, it's like just a grade, like 0 to 100. With the one we saw, it's like, oh, so we were like, oh, we want to see people with 85 or above. Well, we found out later that was, well, we found out really quickly that was a written language assessment. So we actually had to lower our threshold because verbal English language was a higher deal from us, and we needed to lower the thing to get enough candidates that had high verbal scores. And then you add that to your process, right? So then instead of having 3 gates, we had a 4th gate, which was a video talking to you in English, you know, communicating. So having some kind of communication, and you could do it around a skill set. You could kind of double dip, talk about your P&L or whatever you wanted to do. So it was like a really, you kind of like learn these things as you go through. I tell people it takes at least a year per jurisdiction to like hit all of the different things that you kind of mess up throughout the way, from how you do contracts versus like, are they contract? Are they employees? Is that the terms they use in those countries? Like, is that an insult? Is that a compliment? Like you're like, I just want to hire good people, folks. Like I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. So
I'll quickly add to that. Matthew was talking about the decision points, and something I've thought about is filtering. So you want to have a whole lot of applicants, but the more filters you have, the smaller the pool of candidates gets. So being specific about what's really important and what's not as important, because otherwise you might not end up with a big enough pool of suitable people. And something we have decided there is around remote hiring. So allowing people to work from home, and then you can hire anywhere in the Philippines. Whereas if you're trying to hire for a specific office location, that was a big filter in just cutting out a whole lot of people that were unable to take a role. We also do something similar with Loom videos, so that you can get a feel just for what somebody's like, but also for us, spoken English is really important as well as written English, because we want the team to be able to have calls together, and as well as just the written side of things.
Yeah, cool. Do you have like a favorite model, or is that kind of, because you've gone through them all, when you think about it, Meryl, I mean, and Matthew, obviously maybe where you've ended up, but like, is there something, say someone on this call today is like, okay, and we need to look into offshoring, where do we start? Where would you kind of recommend they go?
oh, where do you start? Oh, start with a
Yeah.
partner. Yeah, you
Yeah.
screwed up too bad, like with DIY, unless you're going to do like part-time, like a couple thing. But if you're going to like hire a person, I think you start with a partner. That's how, I mean, I don't know. I think I learned more from TOA than anybody, like going through that experience than I learned from the direct stuff. Also, the same in St. Lucia, I learned more from our partner Grow than I would have, I think, if I would have done it direct. I just talking to smart people that have already done it, like it's really helpful. And it's a little bit of a hedge because you got something built in to support them in those jurisdictions when they're like starting. One of the things we did say is we always hired 2 at a time in a role, so people didn't feel lonely. So
Yeah.
Okay. What about you,
I think
Meryl?
I think it depends. So I think there's definitely advantages to going with a partner, and they can solve some of those initial problems like IT setup, security, payroll compliance. In my experience, I found it quite hard to unwind the partnership. Um, specifically around exit clauses. And so that's something I'd be very mindful of, because to me, if you go with a BPO and you can't take your team, if you leave, you're building your business on somebody else's land. So in an accounting firm, team members are the key part. It's a service business, it's a people business. And if you've invested years in training your team and you can't take them, if you want to move to a direct model, you want to set up an entity, then I'd be very cautious of doing that. And if you think that you might want to go direct, I'd encourage you just to figure out those problems once at the start, if you might be interested in that option, because it caused us a whole lot of pain and hours of effort trying to unwind that situation. And so that's just something I'd be mindful of. I definitely think there's pros, particularly if you don't think you ever want to manage some of the ins and outs of that yourself with direct. I think there's a place for the BPOs, but if you think you might, I'd just solve. I don't think it's that difficult. I do think you need to learn about Filipino culture and the way that it works, but some of those things like computer equipment, IT setup, payroll, there's providers that can help with that, and I don't think it's that hard to figure it out. So slightly different perspective to Matthew there.
Yeah, I'm still going through that process, so I reserve the right to come back and tell you differently.
Awesome. Alrighty then. So we've chosen our offshoring model, and now we were going to chat security. So how do you manage security and protect client data? I know this is very important in accounting.
Well, I think the way people deal with it is they get a partner and they like, hey, you deal with it. Or for us, because we're all working from home, we just have a specific global standard that we're dealing with, regardless if you're US or no matter where you sit in the globe. I think the bigger issue that comes up here is facilities. It's how stable are people's internet? How stable is their electricity? Like you start getting into some more Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like you start below security here. It's like power, internet capabilities. What are you going to do to bundle infrastructure, get equipment to them? And then do they have a physical space big enough to do their job if they have to be on calls and stuff like that? So there's a piece here that's more important than the security, I think, that in our estimation, I think everybody, or at least the people with the cloud firm, anybody with a cloud firm, like gets how to do this. Like if you're a facilities-based firm and you just have one facility and now you're going to do this, then that's a whole other ball game. So that's a different thought process. But if you're already cloud-based and you have say you have 20 people and they're all over the States, like what the difference between where they sit? I think we had more concern with now, are we going to do an IT stipend? Are we going to do an internet stipend? Are we going to do are we going to do an electricity stipend? Like those questions were a bigger deal to us at the end of the day. I get why people ask about this because clients ask about it. At the end of the day, like thinking about the stipends ended up being a bigger deal than the security. From a solve perspective, like
I'd agree with that. And electricity and blackouts and knowing, so that's a question we ask. Well, we don't specifically spell out what they have to do, but what's backup do you have at your home? Do you have a generator? Do you have somewhere else you can work? If there's a blackout and you don't have electricity, we test internet speed because that's important. So that's part of the hiring process to make sure that there's a suitable workplace. In terms of sending equipment, I know some firms will have their IT provider in the US buy the equipment, send, and then set up whatever they want and then send it out. But also it's possible just to have a list of specifications, get a quote from a computer shop in the Philippines, and then just reimburse that. And then there's accounting IT companies. So Nimble, who Matthew mentioned, they also are building out an IT offering where they can, if you get the equipment purchased in the Philippines, they'll be able to lock down the device if something happens or manage it remotely. And again, similar to what Matthew said, if you've got a cloud firm with people working across the country, then it's not that different in the Philippines. It's the same kind of security protocols. But there's also many different providers, tech for accountants, I think it's called, Nimble, that there's plenty of options out there, particularly easier if you are a cloud firm already.
Yeah, does Practice Protect do the equipment too, or do they just do the shutdown and stuff like that? Does Jamie do that? Do you know?
They do. Jamie lives just near me on the Gold Coast, so we caught up recently. So Practice Protect is a password management tool, but they have some add-ons. And so they will help to organize, or through a partner of theirs, sending equipment And they do some cybersecurity work as well. So around monitoring emails, and they also have that option to shut down a device if, say, it was stolen, then they can go in and shut that down. So I wouldn't call them a full managed service IT provider, but they do have some of those options as well. So that's another good one to consider.
There's smart people that can help people with solutions if you don't have a big IT back office. So.
Cool. So is that the answer you kind of give to clients? Because I know that does come up, right? Like, what about is my data secure? You'll say it's no different remote.
I just tell the sales team to close the deal. Like, I'm just saying, like, why are you calling me about this? Like, tell them to look at the terms of service. We're transparent where people live. Like, why are they worried about it? We've got insurance. Like, come on. No, this came up this week actually, with people talking about security. Typically when people talk about security, I've found that they don't care about security. They are just uncomfortable with the concept of being outside the United States because they're not educated, because they've never met a human that was doing it, right? They haven't had the human interaction, back to the humanity of this. Like, they just don't get that yet. And so I find this more of an education concept to people. And I mean, candidly, with people, you're like, if you want us to keep doing it cost effectively, you got to let us do it cost effectively and manage it, right? Like, you keep saying you want to be cost effective. The market does, right? So I can do it the other way. I did that for years. Like, we were US only for the first, 15 years. So like, I can do it that way. But everybody said, hey,
you're not allowed. No. What about you?
What about? Well, too expensive. We don't understand what you do. So, this is my cop out.
I'm probably talking to more accountants, but I think it's more of a concern that they're worried about it. Or cybersecurity is a big business risk, but it's not necessarily specific concerns that they have. It's more, I should be thinking about this if I'm going overseas for the first time.
Yeah. The worst part about that is then you ask their accountants about their US security and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I'm fine. They're in the US. I was like, you should probably look at that.
Passwords. Passwords in the spacebar. Okay, cool. Well, look, I'm just being conscious of the time, and I did want to touch on kind of training, onboarding, especially when it comes to working in a niche. I think, a lot of our partners are e-commerce focused, or they have other focuses. It could be, like crypto or other things that might be slightly more complicated, not cookie cutter accounting. How do you manage onboarding and training once you've got your team sorted and hired over there?
I don't think this is a outsourcing, like where they live doesn't really matter, I don't think, with the niching actually. But you do have to build a robust training program to be able to prepare people for success no matter where they live in the world. The one difference I did find, and this was because I hired similar kind of demographics to Meryl in the US, we had to have a more robust promotion path once we went international than when we were just US. In the US, we had recruited people who were at the level they wanted to be and were comfortable at. And so one of the things going abroad did for us was require us to build more robust general training programs for promotion, for moving through the levels, to build a career path for folks that hadn't reached their destination. Because our offshore team skews way younger than our US team, like 15 years younger on average, I would guess 15 to 20 years. So they're in an earlier stage of their career. So training got more important to us real fast, not because it was offshore, is because we had changed the demographic on which we were hiring. So it's interesting what you do when you move there, right?
That's pretty similar to us, because our team members in the Philippines are usually younger. We do have some working mums as well, but often they're in their 20s and they're in that phase of their career where they're wanting to get promoted and they're wanting to move up. We noticed that our original promotion path was only to become a leader, so a people manager, whether it was a team leader, that was kind of the only promotion path. But we realized some accountants they didn't want to manage people, but they wanted to have another path. And so we have some other pathways through things like onboarding and technical specialists. And we noticed that more in the Philippines, that there were quite a few people that with great talent that didn't want to be people leaders. So that was something we had to think about. Where Beaninges only works in e-commerce. So but we don't generally hire e-commerce specialists. We hire great accountants, and then we train the e-commerce piece. And I think of e-commerce as more complicated than, say, if you're doing accounting for a service business of a similar size. And so we had to create training programs around that. And then we also do a buddy system. When someone starts, they're working really closely with someone else so that they can ask all of the questions that come up and get fast feedback, which can be one of the challenges when you're working remotely. Because I think if you're in an office and you're a young 20-something accountant, you can learn really quickly just through osmosis, learning, hearing conversations. And so we had to be more intentional about that as a remote firm.
Yeah, we had, just to give you an idea, we had 3 levels before we went international, and we had to have 5 in between level 1 and level 2.
Wow.
5 levels that people could progress through on a regular cadence to be able to keep up with kind of culturally the expectations of also the life stage that those folks were at.
Wow.
So 15 years we had 3 spots, and then all of a sudden we're like, okay, who's an accountant 1, 2, 4, 3, 7, 9? Like, it's just interesting. And some of the BPOs, I saw that there too. So
right. And so you did mention that in the recruitment process, like that, making it clear that there are promotions available. So that's why you've got to have them there for them.
Well, we hadn't done that when we were recruiting most of our folks. Now we do, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's like most of our folks, we've had most people pretty stable in our international teams. So
cool.
Been around for a while.
All righty. Well, we'll move on to the last question, but also, I mean, we must be hitting all the right notes because the audience hasn't asked anything, but please feel free to ask any questions because we'll get to them in a second. But again, I did have a chat. It was actually Brittany Brown who asked this, and it was about kind of ongoing management and how, and the cultural differences, and how do you set everyone up for success with those kind of cultural differences?
So
quite a few questions in there, just get them all in there.
Yeah, I mean, so we talked to some of the larger companies when we did a recent reorganization of our company and how people kind of work together, and we have a concept of pods that very many of you use that we hadn't used historically. We had 8-person pods, so we had a great deal of discussion around how to do that. And there was 2 models. There was kind of like a model where you have an international head, and then kind of everybody reports to them, or the other model was you just integrate them with the rest of the team. Like there's no delineation from that, and they both have lots of merit. Based on all of the things. So what we did is we moved from an ongoing management perspective to integrating everybody on the teams they were. That was highly because every single discipline had it. Like sales had people, marketing has people, IT, HR, service lines. So our international employees are like all the way throughout the organization. So it's really deep and pervasive. They're not just client serving. So, but then what we had to do in each of the jurisdictions that have critical mass, St. Lucia and the Philippines, we have kind of a chief of staff that has accountability for cultural issues to identify that we're being culturally responsive, or there's something that's going on that we don't know about that they bring to the attention of the group. So that's kind of but I think there's really 2 kind of clear paths from what I've seen, because a lot of people just have different preferences. How'd you guys do it, Meryl?
So we do it with the second method. I can see how your integrated method would work really well. We're probably not there yet. So we have a manager in the Philippines, kind of like your chief of staff. So she's got an HR, operations, culture responsibility, as well as doing some review work and managing the team leaders. And then the team leaders report to her, and then the team leaders manage their teams. So that's how we've structured it. And that was really important for us when we were still learning about culture in the Philippines, because we were doing so we do one-on-ones where team member will have a conversation with their manager, and it's supposed to not be about workload. So it's not to talk about work. It's how are you going? Let's check in on what your goals are. So that kind of thing. Are you happy? Is there anything you're not happy with? But we were finding when we were doing that, not all of the information was flowing up. And so we were getting some surprises, or there were things that team members weren't happy with that we didn't know about. But once we had our manager in the Philippines handling that, then things really change in terms of being made aware of, okay, that's an issue. Okay, let's go and solve that. So I think we're going to stick with that model for now, where it's the Filipinos reporting to a manager there, but our manager then works very closely with the US managers to raise issues, talk about capacity planning and workload. So she's almost like an advocate for what they need. So that's working well for us at the moment.
And the way you're doing it, Meryl, also scales because the company we talked to, a company called Propeller, they had the same structure and they have a bigger, larger international presence. They're 4 times our size, I think. So they're like have a much larger structure, and they had that same structure as you. So both are very relevant, I think, at scale as well. So it's just a choice you have to make. It's kind of like flavors of ice cream, right?
Yeah. So would you always recommend kind of hiring a manager pretty early on to handle this, Meryl?
I think it's really critical. Oh, did you ask Meryl? So Matthew jumped in
anyways, sorry, Matthew.
You go, Matthew.
I think the success of a new jurisdiction that you go to is highly dependent on like identifying like that person that's not scared to give you feedback. So it's just there's like so we have 2 people in St. Lucia that will like tell us when something's wrong. We have like 3 people in the Philippines that will tell us when something's wrong. Like there are just advocates there, like natural advocates, and identifying those folks earlier and making it safe for them to come directly to people that can make a change is really, really critical to success, because you're going to screw up a lot of things, and people take a lot of things and take them to the nth degree. And like, it's amazing kind of the tangents. You're like, how do people think that? And they're like, well, so-and-so said this. And they're like, that was like turned into something. And that's like a tangent off there. And we're like, oh my gosh. I was like, oh, we're not hiring in St. Lucia anymore. Somebody told me. I was like, how are we? No, well, you guys put a job offer in the Philippines. It's not in the St. Lucia. And we're like, I have no idea that like we're not smart enough to put them in both places at the same time to see the best candidate yet, guys. We're just like trying to figure that out. Like that doesn't mean we're shutting St. Lucia. Like it was just like it's just crazy the different ways people take stuff. Communication gets super important in any organization, in any jurisdiction as you get bigger, I guess. So
there was a game changer for us once we found a really strong leader in the Philippines. So someone that the team respected, they felt comfortable with, but also had respect. And there's someone that could be frank with us, because I think the cultural difference is that I found Australians and Americans are more direct with what they want. And so our Filipino team wasn't being as frank with us about situations, but our leader is definitely fine and comfortable communicating like that. And that was really helpful in feeding the issues up, but also for the team feeling supported, but feeling comfortable. But it was interesting when we were on the team retreat, our leader's called Rose, and she's only a little bit older than some of the other team members, but they call her Miss Rose. There's something about her. She's got a presence. There's a level of respect. I mean, you can't pick that up on Zoom. So that was something awesome to see that level of respect when we were on the team retreat.
We had that. We had Mama Lisa. Like that. Okay. I guess the big cultural thing that you have to start coaching people on in the US in particular is in interpersonal reactions, or like when you're face to face with folks, you can't say, did you get that? You have to say, can you tell me now what you're going to go do? Because then they'll tell you in a non-threatening way what they plan to do based on your direction. If you ask them other question, they will say, okay. And they will go off and like try to figure it out. The other thing people do like like different people have different language kind of ability. Like if English is their true second language, like using async communication for those people in particular can be very effective, because they can rewatch, or they can slow it down, or they can come back and see what they want, and then they can ask clarifying questions asynchronously. So making sure you record stuff so that they can have that, things like that. Those are some practices that aren't bad generally. But when you start getting into second language learners in particular, it was amazing. I thought on our last trip, I was like, oh, this guy's so shy. Like we just have a real shy guy. It's one of our best bookkeepers. He's like totally shy. But at the karaoke bar, like he's belting out in his native language like the last song of the night. Like he jumps on stage and does this and like and he hasn't even been drinking. Like he has just been like he is just like, oh, and I'm like, that English is his second language. And I'm like, he's not shy. He's like unsure a little bit of his English like potentially, or I just need to shut up and give pause and create space for him to ask questions back. That was you just have these wonderful human experiences when you go to the Philippines or any jurisdiction where you have a team that you're not never been to. It's just it changes your perspective in a way that is both enriching and altering of your experience that you can't get online. So
amazing. Cool. Well, thank you so much for both sharing your insights today. You've clearly walked it all and have lots of stories to tell. And I know that we've got a question that's come through. We're right on time, actually, guys. We nailed it. But we've just got one question that's come through that says, what is the benefit of using an employer of record service versus directly paying offshore teammates as contractors?
I think if you're wanting to hire team members as employees, then an employer of record service is a good way to do that if you don't want to go Matthew's route of setting up the entity in the Philippines, because they'll handle their contract and they'll process payroll and handle all of the healthcare, government benefits, or all of that sort of thing. The independent contractor is a route as well. I think it's just important to make sure that it is a legitimate independent contractor arrangement, because otherwise you could open yourselves up to some issues there. But that is a path that some accounting firms use as well.
I liken this question to like if you're in the US, whether you 1099 somebody or you W-2 somebody, and like there's similar rules in each of the jurisdictions. So there's just a risk question you ask at some point of like, how much risk am I willing to accept? When you're like doing like in the US, you have this question, right? Do you 1099 somebody, but you're really directing them? Shouldn't they just be W-2? Like that's just a risk choice. So that's the same choice in another jurisdiction to me, if that's the question.
Awesome. Well, any closing comments today, team? We've got a couple minutes.
If you're thinking about it, jump in and try, and also go and so if whatever country you hire in, try and spend time there. So if it's the Philippines or if it's India or wherever it is, go and meet your team members in person. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah. I'll put a plug for our YouTube channel. So Patty Scharf is now back YouTubing for those people that know Patty Scharf. That is like she has re-engaged her e-commerce accounting. So if you love e-commerce accounting, I don't know how Patty Scharf's YouTube channel is not on your must-watch list. So it's called Acuity e-commerce now. It used to be the Catching Clouds channel. So
oh my
we'll
gosh.
do that. That's my plug. So
I love that. I actually watched Patty Scharf videos before I interviewed for A2X. She got me my job.
I've watched quite a few over the years. Yeah, no, she's great.
Patty is back in the YouTube realm, and I am so excited because I'm learning for her. I'm going to try to do that for some of our different verticals, but she's amazing. So
I should probably mention Team Up as well. That's a business that I'm involved with as an investor, and so they handle the recruitment piece. So if you're looking for help hiring great team members in the Philippines, then Isaac from Team Up is a great guy to have a chat with.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Hello, Isaac. So yeah, you opened it up for us, Ellen, because nobody's asking questions.
Totally.
We're just gonna start pitching stuff. We're involved in lots of stuff. You better watch out. Like the next one's Verify IQ. Here we go. Come on. Like let's start pitching, guys. So,
Thank you both for coming on and sharing all your wisdom with us today. And it was lovely to have a chat with you.
Thank y'all.
Cool.
Thanks.
Have a great day. See you, team.